as a believer. That has been my favorite song. It has only increased as the days have gone by. When my now 21-year-old was between 2 and 3, she hated to sleep. She had way too much to do to be bothered with things like sleep. And so I would go in her room at night and we would talk and read, and then I would sing in the garden to her, to Faith Marie. And to this day, as far as I can remember, she is the only human being who has ever asked me to sing a song again. So it elevated. And then we have this prayer garden down at Omni. It's called His Place. And it's my favorite place on the property, and it will always be my favorite place on the property. And we had just, for years and years and years, we had it, but we had not installed lights or power or anything like that. And we had some power, and we had put in lights. And we went, if I'm remembering this right, David, it was at night, because I have a picture that goes by on my digital screen of Carl. Anyway, we went over there. I can't remember who all was there, but I know Carl was there, and I know David was there. I don't know if David's had much time to tell you about his cousin Carl. And Katie and David had Carl in twice a year, Katie, is that right? Anyway, Carl had some special needs, but he was
He would come twice a year whether we wanted him to.
But Carl was a man who loved the Lord. He went home to be with the Lord, helped me with the years, 2 years ago. And anyway, so we made our way through the woods down this path that we called His Place Trail, and we got there and turned on the lights and waterfalls flowing, and it was just a special night. And someone began to say, we need to sing a worship song, and nobody came up with one. And about this time, out of Carl, who I would have never imagined, he starts bellowing out in the garden, and the Holy Spirit, the presence of God fell on us, and it will always remain one of my favorite memories in the world. So today, when you started singing that, the memories of that night with Cousin Carl just kind of overwhelmed me, and I think overwhelmed Dave and Katie. And it has a whole bunch to do, that song has a whole bunch to do with what I'm going to talk about today. Omni is a ministry. There are some nuts and bolts about it, but that's not what I wanted to talk about today. And David gave me the chance, the opportunity to tell God stories. I did bring some brochures that our dear friend Mike and board member Mike has put together. I put them back on the back table if you want to know the nuts and bolts. But today, I'd like to just tell a few more God stories. And so the last time I had the opportunity to speak, for those of you who were here, I got to tell a few God stories. I've told about how God miraculously cured my incurable hiccups. I got to tell about my wife, Allison, who this is the first time she's gotten to come with me, and her uncompromised obedience to God's will, and how it played such a role in my healing, and the courage that it took. And then I told right at the end about the peace that I had lying on death's door, pretty certain that I was about to die, and knew that I was going to be with the Lord, and the peace that overwhelmed me was just amazing. What a wonderful experience that is to recount to this day. And so today, I'm going to tell a few more God stories. I've tried to pare them down, because there's a bunch of them, and one will run with another. And over the last year, God has kind of made me understand how this one should always fit with that one, so it makes it a little shorter. But I've tried to pray over it since David called me and come up with one. So I got to tell a little bit when John Riley was here about how I became a believer in Auburn and how much John's Bible study had to do with that. So I want to skip forward to about a year into my being a believer. I went to my first Christian conference of any kind. I don't know why I never went to a church camp or that kind of thing. And my parents were very strong believers. My parents were great friends with Dave's mom and dad. They were next door neighbors when they lived here. And we pretty much were in church when the doors opened, but somehow I never went to anything. So I was about a year in, trying to put this Christian thing together. God had already done some great things in my life, and I was invited by the guy I actually prayed to receive Christ place to go to the Campus Crusade Christmas Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. And we were in the Biltmore Hotel, and it had been going on for several days, and I was a miserable human being. I did not fit in. I just, first place they didn't have my room, so I was in a room about 15 minutes away, and that's how it started. And then I'd sit in these meetings, and the meetings were good, but they'd say things like, okay, now let's stop and have a 15-minute quiet time. Open your Bibles and have a quiet time. Well, I'd open my Bible about 2 minutes in, I was finished. And I'd look around the room, and everybody was, and I was just thinking, what, once again, I just don't fit. I just don't fit. Well, on December 31st, January 1st, it ran into January 1st, of that night, that's when we were there. It was New Year's Eve, that was my birthday. And this girl that was there that went to come to me, she got a bunch of people together and threw me a surprise birthday party, most of whom I did not know. And it's kind of weird to go to a birthday party for yourself with a bunch of people you don't know, but anyway, that's how it happened. And somehow, and I can't tell you to this day, it was 3 or 4 guys, all of whom I just met there. We ended up on the very top floor of the old Biltmore Hotel, and we snuck and found, and we worked, and we got out on the roof. So we were standing, as it was New Year's Eve, becoming New Year's Day, we were standing out on the roof of the Biltmore Hotel, and the presence of God just, boom, came down on us. Never experienced anything like it, never imagined anything like it, and it changed me forever. It took me on a path I just couldn't forget. No matter what the enemy or what my flesh wanted, what road wanted to take me down, I remember that night on Biltmore Hotel. So that, like I say, that was December 31st of 79, January 1st of 80. So the next morning, we got up, we headed home, and I go through Auburn. On the way home, I stop by my house. I watch Alabama beat Penn State for the national championship on a goal line stand. If you're an Alabama fan, it was a big deal. It was a goal line stand on 1 yard. They won the national championship, and I went on from there to my home in Dothan, Alabama. My mom and dad were sitting there with my sister, and my oldest sister, Melissa. Her husband was a new young doctor in Dothan, and she did not like to be alone, so she was over at my parents' house, and they were watching the Orange Bowl. Bobby Bowden, if I'm not mistaken, it was his first Orange Bowl appearance in 1980, and they were all sitting. I can tell you where my mom was sitting, my dad was sitting, my sister was sitting, and she's looking through, my sister Melissa was looking through a Southern Living magazine, and she looked at me and she went, "Hey," she said, "Clay, here's a place that offers water skiing, this camp in North Carolina. They offer water skiing, they must need somebody to teach it. Why don't you go teach it there?" Little did I know how my life was about to change. So I thought that might be fun. And I applied to several camps that offer water skiing in North Carolina. But I wanted to be in a boat all summer, let somebody pay me money, and that was as deep as it got. There was nothing more than that. Somebody was going to pay me money to drive a ski boat. So one morning about 6 a.m. at college at Auburn, I get this call from this man who says, "Hey, this is Bill Clymer, and I'm at Camp Thunderbird. I want to talk to you about coming to work for me." And I don't know why he called at 6 in the morning. He said, "Are you awake?" I lied and said, "Yeah." And, anyway, he interviewed me for about, 30, 45 minutes, and most of it was about my walk with the Lord. So he hired me on the spot, and I assumed this YMCA camp in right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, was a Christian camp, and so I was going to go there that summer. I had another, a quarter and a half left at Auburn. I headed off to North Carolina. I'd never been to North Carolina. I don't think I'd ever driven all the way through Atlanta. The Crusade Conference was the first time I'd ever driven into Atlanta, and I go into this place where I didn't know a soul. There was, I'd seen the list. There was not one other person from the state of Alabama. So I get there, and expecting to be in the midst of people who knew how to have 15-minute quiet times. And I got there, and there was not one other believer in the whole place other than me. I take that back. There was one other, and he quit almost immediately. And so I'm here at this place and teaching water skiing and enjoying it. And after a couple of days, I almost came home, but I started meeting some friends that are still dear friends. One of those friends and I are going to Israel this summer. Another God story, but that is if they open Israel. And so I just kind of got involved, and I learned pretty quickly that even though it was a YMCA camp, you had devotions at night, but you did not mention Jesus, because a lot of the clientele there were Jewish, and you could talk about being good to your neighbor, you could talk about, doing right and wrong, but you didn't talk about the Lord. So I got to the third session. It was a 3-week session. I was also, along with being a counselor, an instructor, I was a counselor for 13-year-old boys. And I had a certain group, and we were about 2 weeks in of a 3-week session, and I just loved these guys. And so I decided I was going to break the rules. I had gained a lot of favor with the director, and I didn't think he would fire me. And so I sat down that night. Now, let me back up just a little. I'd been a believer, and in that time, I'd gone back to First Baptist Church in Dothan, and I'd work with the youth in the summer. And I'd share Christ, and they would do just what I did. Okay, yeah, we've heard this. Where's the pizza? And so I expected the exact same response from these kids. Well, just so you'll know, in this particular group, I had the president of France, President Mitterrand. I had his nephew. In that room was the CEO of Caterpillar International. His name was Nick Blackwood. I had his son. I had the owner of Girl Skull out of New York, and then several others, and a bunch of kids, just kids like ours. But most of them were from areas not in the Bible Belt. And I sit down with them. My co-counselor was gone, so it was just those 10 or 11 kids and me. And I began to share Christ. And they had kind of odd looks on their faces. And finally one of them stopped me, and I wish I could remember which one, but I can't. And he said, wait. He said, I've heard of this Christ business before, but I thought he was like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. Are you a grown man sitting there telling me that you believe he exists? And I went, yeah. And all the other kids I started noticing, maybe not all of them, but most of them were shaking their hands in agreement with his statement. And so I began to tell them I had to make those kids go to bed that night for wanting to hear about Christ. And I was thinking, what is going on? Well, it got bigger the next day. Girls and guys from all over the camp came to me and said, hey, can you come to our cabin and tell us about this Christ business? Of course I could, but I was kind of stunned, and I thought, wow. Well, I meant that to be my only summer there. Bill Clymer, the director, he asked me to come back and run his ski program, kind of made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I came back the next year. One more thing happened that summer. I'm a little hard-headed, so it takes God a little while to get my attention. And I was running the ski program, and Bill Clymer came to me and said, hey, Parrish. I don't think he ever called me Clay. And he said, hey, Parrish, he said, I got these girls, and they're in a lot of trouble. He said, they got kicked out of their cabin. Mates don't want to be in the cabin with them, and they mooned a policeman riding in a bus on an out-of-camp trip, and I don't know what to do with them. He said, can you do something with them? And I said, yeah, I got a lot of work for them to do. And so I got these 2 little girls from West Virginia, 14 years old. And I went with them. One of the first things I did was to go and sit with them while they called their parents and told them about the experience that they had on the bus. I knew what would happen to me if I'd been 14 and calling my parents to tell them about that experience. But as I watched, I got really sad because I sat there with these 2 young girls who seemingly had everything that a young girl would want. And they told their parents about mooning the police officer on their out-of-camp trip. And I could tell by the conversation their parents didn't care. They didn't care at all. All they were concerned about was what time do I pick you up and when do we go. It was as if that word had never happened. I recognized immediately that these two young girls might have had all the money in the world, but they had never been loved. So I took them and I put them under boats and made them clean algae and scrape skis, and they were dirty and messy and they'd never been that way. And I just loved on them for about 3 or 4 days. Cared about them. I asked about their life. I did whatever God was telling me to do. And pretty soon I watched this transformation happen in these young girls. And they went back to the other girls in their cabin, so there had been probably about 9 others that had kicked them out and didn't even want to be in the same group with them. And they apologized. And they asked those other girls if they could possibly come back in and spend the next week and a half with their group. And the girls, of course, agreed, and these 2 girls became model citizens by just this much love of Christ. So I got my first year experience, I've got my second year experience, and I'm still not quite there, I'm still not getting what all was going on. And third summer, they offered me to be over the whole ski program. I just graduated Auburn, and over the whole waterfront program. So I came back. By now I was pretty much loving it, and this time Bill Clymer let me hire some of the staff. So I hired believers. And a couple more snuck in like I did. And so I began to watch the transformation of my first year there to my third summer there. And it was amazing, the difference. It was a goof off, do nothing. The key word was let's be slack. Let's see what we can get by with. They used that word slack all the time, drove me out of my mind. And by the third summer, it was one staff competing with the other staff, this staff, the ski staff, the tennis staff, who could be the best, who could do the most. Now, understand, there are only 10 probably out of 110 staff members that were believers. But the entire place was transformed. So I'm up on a hill one night outside my apartment, and I don't have campus kids anymore. And I'm sitting on that hill, and I recently visited again, somewhere within the neighborhood of the exact place. And I'm just sitting up there, and I'm watching the goings, people on their nights off coming in and out. And I'm sitting up on this hill, and I hear the Lord say, not audibly, but just in my spirit, this was the promise. If you build a place like this, where you're the best in the world at teaching tennis, and golf, and sailing, and water skiing, you can reach the kids who will one day control the world, therefore you will change the world. And I went, oh, that's a good idea. A little slow. I had no idea it was directed at me. So I went on about my business. I was going to be a wealthy businessman. That's what I was going to do when I became, way before I became a believer, but when I became a believer, I said, okay, I'll just earn money for God. Still works. So I, oddly enough, ended up back in North Carolina on Charlotte's on the west. I was over in the eastern part of North Carolina working, and everything was going well, really well. And I couldn't get over that word. I couldn't get over what God had told me that night up there on that hill. So as it just began to get in me more and more, I began to talk about it. I began to talk to 2 guys who happened to be in Chapel Hill. One named Scott, one named Jeff. Scott was working on his PhD. Jeff was finishing up. He was the campus leader of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He was the one who got Billy Graham to come in and do a crusade in Chapel Hill. And I met both of them at Thunderbird, and I began talking about it. They even began talking to my family about it. My mom and dad were like, yeah, that's a good idea. So it was burning in me so much that I was ready to do it right then. Had no idea what I was talking about and knew it was impossible to raise that kind of money. So I actually left my house and drove up to Chapel Hill one night to meet with Scott and Jeff to talk about how we might do this. While I was doing that, I called my father and to talk about something else. And in that thing, he said, well, you know, in purchasing something like that, when are you thinking about doing this camp thing? And I said, well, Dad, what I was thinking, this was about October, I said, I was thinking I might turn in my resignation right at the end of December and then start, you know, give them a notice and start in January, February. And the phone got silent. This is a believing daddy. said, you don't have any money. You don't have, if somebody had given you $50,000, then maybe I'd say yes, but no, you can't leave a job like that. He knew I got a much better job than I deserved. And he could not bear to see me quit it. And it was bad. I hung up the phone. And I was in turmoil because I had already gone so far down the road. So my first fleece, only thrown out 2 in my life. I believe in fleeces, but I believe you have to be very careful. So what happened, I was the volunteer youth minister of the First Baptist Church in Dunn, North Carolina. And it was a Wednesday night. That happened on a Sunday. So I'd gone back home, gone to work. And, let me back up just a little. On Monday, I wrote my dad a letter. I wrote him a letter and I told him about the things he had told me about growing. He grew up in the heart of the Depression. He worked his way through dental school, scrubbing floors. He knew what it was like to have heart, and he told me how many opportunities that had been offered to him, but he did not take them because he wouldn't take a chance, and he wished he had had that over again. I wrote this letter. I called my dear mom from my office in North Carolina, and I read it to her, and I said, Mother, because she had wisdom, I said, should I send this? She said, you send it right now. So I mailed the letter, and so that was Monday. Go to Wednesday. I'm at the church. We have a pizza dinner, and I'm in just turmoil on the inside. And we're cleaning up the kitchen, I remember, and I kind of, all of a sudden, I bumped into this door, and the door swung open, and I recognized that it led into the sanctuary. The sanctuary was pitch black dark. And I go into that sanctuary, and I just look at the Lord in the most honest time I've ever had with him, and I said, Father, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll work and make money and support ministry. I'll go and try this ridiculous thing, this camp, but this I will not do. I will not go against my Father's will, against my Father's wishes. So if you want me to do Omni, you let my Father change his mind. There was about as much chance of that happening as a river running through through this church right now. He was not going to change his mind. When he got set, he was set. So I go home and get ready for work the next day. Phone rings, it's my mom. My dad never made a call in his life. He always had mom make it, then he'd get the phone. And so it's my dad. And I asked my mother before, she said, your dad wants to talk to you. And I said, well, has he gotten a letter? And she said, no, he hasn't. I said, well, why does he want to talk to me? She said, I don't know, but he's been driving me crazy all week to talk to you. This is hard for me. He got on the phone. He said, Clay, he said, I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am about what I said to you the other night. He said, I grew up in the Depression, and I know how hard things can be sometimes. And he proceeded to tell me almost everything I had written in that letter. He had never read it. And he said, I want you to know this. He said, I'm 100% behind you. And whatever you do, whatever you need to do, you do it. And your mom and I are right there with you. That proved to be the truth. So that was a pretty incredible night. I did just what I said, to talk to him about, quit my job, many God stories in between now and what I want to tell you, but I can't tell them all. But I had saved enough money to live about 6 months. I moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, an hour away where Jeff and Scott were. Scott and I moved in together in an apartment right there in Franklin Street, right off Franklin Street, which is the main deal in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And we started Omni. Now let me tell you, when we started Omni, we didn't have a clue. We had no money to speak of, except just enough to live on. This guy was going to walk out on his PhD when he was had almost completed it. Jeff was going to join us because he was about to graduate from North Carolina, and we did not know anything about what to do. So we just got started, and we were there, and one of the first things that happened is, and I think it was Jeff, we got a meeting with the largest Christian professional fundraising group in America. And I think we went to Virginia for this meeting. some reason Virginia sticks in my mind. And what they said to us was, you won't raise the money for a down payment. They basically said, this is the dumbest thing in the world. You can't do it. They realized we would not be deterred, and so they said, well, if you're going to do this and you want to do it in Florida, there's a man named there named Johnny Cash, not the singer, but he's down somewhere in Florida, and you need to meet Johnny Cash. And so we just put that in our little bag, wrote down Johnny Cash's name, or probably didn't even have to, because it's his famous name. So we run out of money. God does some different stuff. We end up in my parents' lake house, little family lake house that we built as a project in Florida, with no money, still no tax exempt organization. We'd run out of money, but we just went. And I had on my heart this man named Truett Cathy. Now, a lot of people know who Truett is now. He's the founder of Chick-fil-A. At that time, he was still pretty big, but Chick-fil-A was not on every street corner, but there was not one in Dothan. I heard this man loved children. Don't know how I found that out, and I was convinced that we were supposed to meet Truett Cathy, and I was supposed to share the vision with Truett. And so I started writing him letters. Got absolutely rejected. Telephone calls. Secretary would not let me talk to him. So I was sitting out on the dock one day at the lake. I came in, and my partner Scott looked at me and said, look, I just heard from Truett's secretary, and they said to quit calling, that he's not going to meet with us. I was devastated. I didn't know what to do. Here we were, quit our jobs, living in my parents' lake house, no money and no direction. So Scott couldn't take that. And he was a brilliant writer, and he wrote a letter to Truett through his secretary. And he even joked after he told me he had written it about him calling us on a Saturday when I happened to be going to the only Auburn game I was going to go and wanted us that day. And I said, yes, sure. Fast forward a couple of weeks, got my bag in my hand, walk into my car, walk out of my car, put my bag in. For some reason, I need to turn in to get one more thing before I head to the Auburn game. I walk in, and Scott's on the phone. He hangs the phone up, and he looks at me, and he said, Truett Cathy wants us to come spend the weekend with him at Berry College. I went, sure. And he said, no, I'm serious. He wants us up there. I don't know where Jeff was, but anyway, we hopped in the car. We go up to Berry College in North Carolina, where David and Katie go often, and Mike and Tracy, Allison and I have been there in the last couple of years. And at this time, there was not wind shade. That was a dream for Truett at the time, but it was everything that was happening that weekend. He was putting on the camp for the summer. I we walked up, and kids are running everywhere. They run over and grab just powerful man by the leg and call him Truett, and he'd love on them. And so he said, okay, come on, let's take a walk. So we walked around the Berry College campus. If you've ever been there, it's beautiful, and we're walking, and I'm sharing the vision as much as I knew a little bit about what I've just told you with Truett, and telling him what we want to do. And he went, okay. And then he said, hey, look, y'all like kids. There are kids here. Go work with them. So Scott and I headed off to work with kids. That was no problem. And that night, we were all in the Berry College cafeteria, and we sat down, and Truett came over, and we sat. Scott and I were, I can't remember, but Truett sat across from me, and he looked us in the face, and he said, you can't do this. You guys have left really good careers and good opportunities, and I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but what you're talking about doing is not possible. Go back and get your jobs. Go back and get your career. I was devastated. I didn't know what to do. Went to bed that night in the Berry College dorms and didn't sleep, thinking about what had just happened. And so the next morning it's breakfast. I'm still devastated. I'm sitting there with Scott. He didn't even talk to me because he didn't know what to say. About this time, Truett comes over and sits down beside us and says, hey, I want to show y'all something. Come on, go with me. So we get up and we get this old truck, the bench seat, all the way across. So the three of us are crammed in there. We start driving over these terraces and all these things and we pull up at this old dairy, working dairy farm. And Truett begins to tell us his dream about what he wants to build and what he's doing there and what he wants to do with kids. And I didn't care. I didn't want to know what his dream was. I wasn't thinking about his dream because he had just shattered mine. But I was trying to be polite and listen. And then we see it all and hear it all. And I can tell him some ideas that I had about, how to make things work for kids. And we get back in the truck, we're driving over all those terraces, and it seemed like, I don't know, it's a long way, it's now a paved road, but we're driving it, and he pulls up under this tree, I think, big old oak tree, I think, and throws that thing in gear. I like to say it was a 3 on the tree, but I don't think it was. And he throws it in park, and he stops, and he looks across the seat at the two of us, and he says, guys, this thing's going to be bigger than even you think it's going to be. But I still can't give you any money because you see what I'm doing. And I didn't have the guts to ask him what happened the other night. I mean, I was a little overwhelmed. I was not long out of college, and I was sitting there with Truett Kathy, so I didn't ask him. I regret that to this day. But obviously, he got a word from the Lord. And so we get home. A couple of days later, we get the biggest check we've ever received for Omni. And for 7 years, every month, we got a check from Truett Kathy. So we're living down here, a lot of stories. There's this beautiful piece of property that is unobtainable that we now own. And it's the finest piece of property in Sunny Hills, Florida, a corporation built by the Deltona Corporation. Remember, we're 3 kids, we don't have any money. We negotiate for this piece of property that they shouldn't have even been selling us. And we got it down to 1/3 of their original asking price. Their original asking price was reasonable. We did this with no experience and no money in the bank to make a down payment. So, long story short, we bought it. And a lot of cool things happened to make that possible. But we paid $100,000 down, and we were about to do that. That's what they wanted. And all of a sudden, I got this deal in me that I was supposed to go to Miami and ask the Deltona Corporation to give us the property. Now, they were in financial trouble, so that made no sense. I told my partner, Scott, I said, hey, Scott, I think God's leading me to go to Miami and ask the Deltona Corporation to give it to us. And he said, what? Scott's very practical. He said, are you stupid? He said, first place, they've come down to 1/3 of the price. Second place, they don't need the tax write-off. Why? And also, we can't afford to drive to Miami. And I said, yeah, but I kind of feel like I have to go and ask him. So Scott, being the kind of friend that he was, said, okay. So we headed off to Miami. I remember we stopped at some little motel. It was literally a roach motel. It had roaches all over the floor, dead ones. For some weird reason, I remember that as a fond experience. We get to Miami, and we get a meeting with the head of the Deltona Corporation Land Development part. We sit down with them. I ask them if they will give us the property, and they laughed in my face. And they said, we've already lowered the cost of it. So they went through all that. We got in the car, and we headed back, stopped in Orlando, stayed at another roach motel. I'm just thinking, Lord, why are we down here? We don't need to be wasting money to come all the way down. Scott's exhausted, and he said, I'm going to bed. And I said, well, I went to school with a girl that she lives down here. I hadn't seen her forever. She doesn't know anything about Omni. I think I'm going to call and have dinner. You want to go with us? He said, nope, going to bed. So sat down with her. Last time I had talked to her, I was in North Carolina working. And so I tell her the Omni story. And she looks at me and she goes, you have to meet my uncle. And I said, well, why? She said, you just have to meet him. Said, he's here, and she began to tell me he was one of the owners of the Orlando Magic. They were trying to get the basketball franchise there. I said, well, what's your uncle's name? She said, Johnny Cash. I said, okay, really? I didn't know what to do. And I don't know that I've ever seen her again from that day on. Well, other than she said at the meeting, we ate lunch. Johnny later told me, he said, I didn't want to meet with you. I was too busy to do anything trying to get Orlando Magic started. I certainly wasn't going to be part of your ministry. He was a board member for years and years and years. Turned out he was best friends with the other Siegel board member we had. Not best friends, they were both on the national SCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes board. Yeah, SCA board. So they knew each other. So these two people, I mean, God's stories are just unbelievable. And he supported us in ways that you can't imagine. I love Johnny to this day. David knows. David's talked with him on the phone, and he's just something special. And God just walks and just led us down these paths. Now, all of those are a long time ago, but David told me to tell you some of the more recent ones. So, I've led us down some pretty bad roads, nothing evil, but I've gotten off point. And one of the board members took me out in November and basically slapped me and said, this is not the ministry you told me we were supposed to be building, what we were doing. He looked at me and said, when are you going to quit wasting my time? I finally woke up. I'm a little slow. And so we have started, and we've gotten back on point. It's in that brochure. Don't have time for that today. But all kinds of things have happened. So one of the things, at Windshape, we met somebody, we went and we met this guy, and he said, very interested in what we were doing, and we're now back on point, and he told Mike and I, we were talking one night after the thing was over, right? The whole deal was closed, they were cleaning up. One thing he said to me is, you need to find Heartland Apostolic Prayer Network. There's one in every state. You need to find the one in Florida. I honored that. I came home. I found them. They actually have a little branch called Tri-State Intercessory Prayer Group. And so there's for Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. It meets in Mariana. I found out when they were having the meeting. I went to the meeting. I didn't know they were going to ask me up to speak. I had about 3 or 4 brochures in the car. And they came up and they said, you come tell us your vision. So I get up and I tell them the vision, and there are several people there that are more than kind of interested in what we were doing. So these 3 ladies, all recent widows, asked me if I would come to Panama City and tell them about Omni, the vision casting. And so I said, well, sure. So I went to Panama City. We all met at a restaurant. They live various places on the coast. And this has been a month ago, about a month and a half. And so I'm sharing the vision. And finally, as I'm looking at all these ladies listening intently, I said, I just want to tell you how much it means to me that y'all would come from all these different places and take your time to come and let me tell you about Omni. Now, one of them, I now know as Tina, she looked at me and she said, why are you thanking us? We've been waiting for you for over 20 years. And I didn't understand what that meant. Well, I had learned in the midst of all of this about this guy named Bob Jones, who I knew a tiny bit about. And I had learned that he lived in Wausau, which is real near Sunny Hills, and he had a period of time there. And they had all sat at his feet many, many times. And oddly enough, about 8 months before, I heard this guy named Chris Valentin, he's about the church, the assistant pastor up there. He gave this 45-minute talk, and I had heard, he was telling about how much Bob Jones had been in his life. Incredible story. And so I was kind of interested in this Bob Jones thing, but I knew nothing about him, and I still didn't understand why. Tina looked at me and said, we've been waiting on you for over 20 years. Well, they started sending me, they had cassette tapes, I guess, and they had recorded many, many things that Bob Jones had said. He'd come to Panama City and speak at their churches. And so Tina had sent me one. I was on an Omni Vision casting tour in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was sitting in a hotel room. I had time by myself to listen to this 60-minute talk because it was just a chat, like sitting in a room together. And so I listened, and it was all pretty interesting. And then at the last maybe 10, 15-minute mark, he tells this story. He said, well, I think it was Kansas City. He said, I was up there, and he said, one day the Lord just told me to move to Wausau, Florida. He didn't say it, but he didn't seem to even know where Wausau was, and that would be understandable, and especially in 1993. And so the next day, a lady, a friend of his, called and said, "Hey, I have a house for sale in Wausau, Florida. You want to buy it?" And he went, "Yeah, I guess that I do." So he goes to Wausau, this $22,000 house. He gets there and he tells the Lord, he said, "Certainly I'm just supposed to give this away. I know you couldn't have sent me down here from," I think it was in pretty significant ministry in there. He's been there about 2 or 3 months, and I'm sitting, remember, I'm listening to this on an old tape recorder now, sitting through my phone, and I'm kind of getting more and more interested. And he says this. He said, "Well, one day, I think I'm just being punished. I decided the Lord was just taking me through chastisement, and I'd done something wrong, and that I needed, that's why I was in Wausau, Florida, in the middle of nowhere. And one morning I wake up, and the Lord says, 'Get me a pickup truck, take a ride with me. I want to show you why you're here.'" So, in my mind, just because I know the area pretty well, he didn't go down 77. He was wandering the back way. Well, if you wander the back way south from Wausau, you're going to run into the paved roads of Sunny Hills. 75 miles of paved roads planned for 100,000 people. And so I'm listening to him talking. Now I'm really interested. I'm leaning into my phone so that I can hear it, or iPad. And he said that when he pulled into those streets, the Lord said, he started looking at the infrastructure. It's really weird to be in the middle of nowhere and to see all this infrastructure. And he said, "Lord, what is this?" And Bob Jones said, "The Lord told me that one day a great revival, a youth revival, when we believe that word, is going to break out in Sunny Hills. We own the finest piece of property in Sunny Hills." I'm sitting there thinking, how did I miss the fact he was down here? Well, other stories, when I left about 92, he came in 93. He also said this in other talks, that all of this would take place when the airport was built and when 77 and 79 were 4-laned from the coast all the way up to the interstate. Well, guess what's happening right now? The airport is completed, very close to Omni, which was a war because nobody knew why they want to go that far from Panama City to build it. And we are within 2 years of completion of 77 and 79 to the interstate. Happening right now as we speak. So you can imagine, I'm sitting in a hotel room hearing this because I had just asked God. Our property is beautiful. It's hilly, really hilly. Some places 60 to 70 feet down to the waterfront. It's sandy. It's hard to build on. And I just asked God, I said, "God, do you really want to do something here? Am I just crazy? Do you really want to do something?" All of this transpired within 2 weeks of that prayer. So those are some God stories. Now, I want to finish with the last one kind of quickly of God's kindness. So, you remember back, I was telling you that about 8 months ago, I listened to this message that Chris Allison gave, and it was about a 50-minute message. And somewhere in there, he told of his experience with Bob Jones, which gave me all the knowledge I had about Bob Jones to that point until these ladies came around. Well, after all this had happened, and after I've sat in a hotel room in Charlotte, and now I'm sitting with these ladies here, another story, and this story, and this story, and they're on our prayer team, and they're fired up about Omni, I was thinking, I was walking up my stairs, this Tuesday will be 2 weeks ago, and it was just a thought, not a prayer, not getting down on my knees begging God for it. I just had this thought as I walked upstairs into mine and Allison's bedroom. I thought, I surely wish I could find that talk that Chris Allison gave. I'd like to hear again what he said about Bob Jones. But I don't listen to a whole bunch of his talks. I don't know why I listened to it. Well, I do now. Why I listened to it that day, but I knew one thing. I couldn't find it again. It just popped up on YouTube one day. And I just went on about my business, thought about it. That night I was going to stay with my brother, who is all of a sudden contracted Alzheimer's and is waiting for his healing. And my niece, his daughter, was going to have surgery, and his wife was going to be with her, so I was staying with my brother that night. I got my brother to bed and sat down on the couch, expecting him to get up quite a few times, and went to YouTube to see what sermons I could listen to. It wasn't the 50-minute talk, it was the 14 minutes of his story with Bob Jones, which is more than fascinating. Now, it's cool that I got to hear that again, but what meant so much more to me than the fact that I got to hear it is that that wasn't the top of the list prayer. It wasn't top of the mountain. It wasn't even a prayer. It was a thought. And our God is so good. He is so good, and He is so caring, and He is so loving. I would have been fine if I'd have never heard that talk again. But He made sure that on that night when I was going to be up all night with my brother, and He heard my little thought that went through my head, He not only gave me the message, which was in somewhere in the 50-minute message that I heard, He gave me the 14-minute exact version. In the garden. He walks with me and He talks with me. That's exactly what He does. You know my favorite line in that song? We carry there, the joy we share as we carry there, no one else has ever known. That's exactly right. Jason has a different relationship with God than I'll ever know. It was tailor-made for Jason. Same with every one of us. There's a tailor-made relationship for each and every one of us. And it's a joy that Jason will share that I will never know. But yet, I'll share things with God that He will never know. Because that's the kind of Father He is. That's the kind of Father who hears a thought as I'm walking up the stairs and says, well, I can handle that. Here you go. How about tonight? So, I think that's why I like to tell God stories so much. There's so many, and I've seen Him do so many things. But I want to close with this. I was 19 when I became a believer. And if you had looked at my life from the inside out, you'd have thought, well, he's on top of the heap. You know, he's got it. I had nothing. I had a hole in me big enough to drive a truck through. I didn't have any of these God stories. It happened ever since I became a believer, on the experience on the Biltmore Hotel to this day. But you get them when you know the Lord. There is nothing in the world as exciting as knowing Christ. Now, I would guess in this group that everybody here knows Christ, but I don't know if they do this on Facebook anymore, but if there's somebody out there who, if you're not sure, or maybe you haven't quite surrendered to the point, because if He'll do this for me, a stubborn, hard-headed, don't got to tell me things about 3 or 4 times before I get them. Poor Allison. And He'll do it for anybody. That's what He wants to do. Mike said something the other day. He said, well, we were talking about, he said, well, of course it happens that way. God's a relational God. Never, that's going to stick with me forever, Mike. You know, God's a relational God. That's exactly what He is. He's the kind of guy that sees His son sitting there in a room thinking, I just don't fit. And takes you up on top of the hotel with a bunch of people you don't know and says, you don't know how well you do for that. Because it's about me, not you. He's the kind of guy who will hear a little thought and make sure you get it and an answered prayer. So if you don't know that God, He's waiting on you. You're created to know that God. He is a relational God. That's what He is, and He wants to have that kind of relationship with you. Yes, you do know that God, and you let the relationship slip. He's standing there with open arms, saying, so that you can say, the joy that we share as we carry there, no one else will ever know. Thank you, pray. Father, I thank you. I just thank you for the opportunity, Papa, just to come and talk about your stories. Sometimes they are so wonderful, they don't even seem real. I have to see things in writing to recognize these things did happen. Lord, we're in a time when we need more God stories. We need more testimonies. We need you. We are desperate. There are so many out there, they don't even know. They are so desperate, they don't even know how desperate they are for you. As our friend Johnny Fang leads a prayer revival in West Virginia, we pray for him. And all over this country, people are waking up to how desperately we need you. Father, I ask for each and every one of us that we would surrender completely, that we would number our days, and that we would know that we were born for such a time as this. We were born for such a time when evil has taken over. Lord, and it is not over. And you are on your throne, and God, we know that we ask, we plead that the bowls are being filled in heaven and that a revival is about to break out. We believe it, we look for it. Thank you again for this opportunity to talk about you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let me tell you what we're going to do. We don't need to come up with the musicians. We never want to leave here without first an opportunity for a person to come and say, I need to talk about this, or I want to receive Christ, or I really want